So today, what we'll be talking about is data retention. It's a very notorious topic. It has two aspects to it: a technical aspect and a process aspect. I'm Rohit. I am the director for privacy technology in Tsaaro. As for my certifications, I'm a CIPM and I'm also a Azure solution architect. So you can consider me a privacy engineer, I would say. I can understand how your technology works and how we make it compliant with the privacy regulations. With me on the call, I have Yeromi. Hi, Yeromi.
Hello, good afternoon from the Philippines. I'm Jerome Culang. I'm a data protection, data privacy professional, and also GRC professional. So I've been in the industry for around 10 years now, and I'm a certified data protection and privacy professional, also into risk. I'm a risk champion. So yeah.
Let me introduce you to Tsaaro, what we do. So Tsaaro is a leading privacy and security service provider in India and internationally. I am based out of Netherlands. I take care of the Netherlands office here. So we help companies from all size, startups to your enterprises with privacy and security solutions, implementing them or creating a whole program for them. And a disclaimer for this: this is purely a educational webinar. Anything which is being discussed here is purely for reference. It cannot be taken up as a legal advice. So in this webinar, we'll be discussing concepts about data retention and how CPRA defines it. Because you guys, it will be active from the 1st of January. And one of the key aspects of it is it includes data which was there from January 2022. So your past 1 year data is also included in this. So data retention becomes a very important topic there. How you build process on it and how you technically implement it. Because if there is a non-compliance, then there are certain, I would say, fines which can be applied to an organization in terms of non-compliance. And then we'll also discuss how exactly can an organization strengthen itself in terms of data retention. So, can you throw some light upon the basic concept of data retention? I know it's there in GDPR, it's there in CCPA, it's there in CCPA. So, how does it look? What is data retention?
Okay. Well, so based on this slide, it says that data retention is the process of storing of personal information of data subject for a specific period of time. That means to say that based on certain data privacy laws, especially for CPRA, we have to set a specific timeline from which we are going to store or retain the personal data, the personal information of our data subjects. And of course, those personal information are something that is identifiable. That's something that we can say that can really identify or has the identity of a certain person. To store data in consonance with the delivery of services to their customers. And then data retention is relevant to the organizations that are required to comply with certain industry government regulations as well.
So, guys, when you're talking about data retention, we always talk about that data has to be stored uh, till a particular time frame, and organizations should only store data for like 2 years, 3 years. If it's data which is required for further audits, for example, financial data, maybe for 9 years, depending on the country, jurisdiction, and the regulation. But what we fail to discuss is data retention is the name, but the main activity here is data deletion. And in this era, when we say that data is the new gold, data is the new oil, data is what to say, companies build strategies how to turn their data, which they have, into a cash flow. And in that era, we are telling organizations to destroy their data. So that is where the difficulty lies. So data retention strategy, building a data retention strategy and implementing it, it's always a lot. I would say it's a discussion and a negotiation rather between the legal team and the various business stakeholders. Where the compliance team would say, okay, guys, we need to put our foot down, and we have to build a strategy, we have to be compliant. But in the end, the business value cannot be decreased, I would say, because once the data is deleted, it's no more, you cannot use it. Jerome, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me now clearly?
Yes, I can hear you now.
So just to reiterate what I said earlier, again, for when we are implementing data privacy and data protection in general, data retention is one of the important things, especially in the digital economy that we are now moving on. Data is one of the most valuable assets. And in terms of that, we have to ensure that our businesses, every businesses actually, would follow the proper concept of data retention because that is where everything lies in terms of us being profitable or us being able to use these kinds of data. It's very pertinent as what was provided here. It's very pertinent for organizations to store data in a consonance with the delivery of services to their customers and always should always be aligned with the data the purpose limitation and minimization which is part of the principles of the GDPR and which is also incorporated in the CPRA.
Yeah, Jerome. Uh, and especially in this era of data rush, like there was a gold rush where everybody was uh, just going to countries, going to any medium where they could find gold. We saw it in Canada, we saw it in Australia. uh, People get mad when they feel that okay, they can earn an extra something using a technique. And today data has become that. Organizations are building strategy to capture as much data as possible, and in this scenario, many a times interest of general people like you and me get hampered. So GDPR and CPRA regulations like them stand beside the data subjects, give them the rights, and put what to say, a check on how much data is being collected, and when can it be destroyed. It cannot stay there forever.
Correct. Actually, just to share as well, Rohit, something about data retention. When I first been appointed as a data protection officer of one of my companies before, it's really one of my dilemma. What kind of data should I store? What data retention, especially data retention, because there are no specific regulations on that. And we have laws, but it is just based on a general assumption and decision that we have to make as an organization. What schedule and what specific length of retention do we have to put on our data? We have to make sure that always the purpose is there and the right purpose is there, and why we also have to had a question, the answer the proper question of why do we store those data on this specific period. That's kind of hard, really, because we are always most of the companies are always leaning into their reference, their regulatory references, but it's not provided in the law. And most of the times, there are certain countries, like for instance in APAC as well, specifically, uh, we are lacking. There are some gray areas, or we still lack areas on what are the basis. But always, we always as DPOs, we always want to provide the minimum basis, and usually it is being forecasted. The forecasting would always be based on our current processes and the history, the data trail that we have been doing, uh, and in terms of the experiences that we can also integrate with certain departments, specific information or personal information that we have.
Yes, you. I totally agree with you, and especially when it comes to sharing information between departments, the lines become very, very, very gray. So but here we are at our question. So as I told you, this is an interactive session. And I think so. Most of the people think it's yes. Are
Yes,
they?
most of our audience who voted for it is they believe that it's there. That is a specific statutory provision that requires minimum retention period in the CPRA. So that's a good insight, I think.
Great, guys. We'll move to the next one. To tell you the importance of data retention, I would say let's go into the challenges that an organization face while implementing this or creating a framework for data retention. And you were sharing your past experience on this. We would really want to hear uh, you about it again, so that we can understand, okay, this is where the organization stand when they think of they should have something where they can control when the data is being deleted and how much time it is being kept for.
Okay. So most of the time when we are setting up or scheduling our data retention period, of course, we have always to ensure that we have the proper data retention and destruction policies at hand. And there are also processes that are in place for us to follow in terms of how we will do specific data retention, specifically for the destruction side, but that's after data retention, of course. In terms of that, we always look into the best practices aside from the regulatory as well. If there are specific regulations that are provided, specifically those involving mandatory collections, then we have to look into that. We have different regulations from different regions, but in California, in our CPRA, there's also a specific requirement for them. Depends on the business or on on the business and on the area where personal information should be used. In terms of the general data retention in different regions, not only in California, but also those covered by the European Union and the GDPR let's say for GDPR, uh, that is it's very important that you look into your business needs. And in terms of, for instance, if you're going to use it for your human resources or recruitment, usually it could just last 6 months to a year of your personal information retention. And then you have to remove or delete it. But again, you always have to back it up. And the buy-in of the management is very important.
I think so. You have summarized it quite well, and especially when it comes to organizations, it's very hard. First of all, it's very hard to categorize and classify data, because guys, when you're talking about in general sense, uh, we know that privacy laws only uh, cover data which is there for people. And in an organization there can be multiple data. For example, there's an organization uh, which collects weather data, I would say. The weather data itself is not essentially related to people. So would there be a retention schedule, or would it be different from the data which have uh, information about the data subjects? Now let's take an example of e-commerce. It's a very I think so it's a very widely used example. It has information for data subjects. It has your payment information, it has your your purchase history, it has your address, it has your name, it has your email ID, it has many things. But along with that, it also stores information about the catalog, about the items. So now it has to segregate, okay, this is people data and this is things data. There are multiple segregations, multiple classifications, which an organization has to do to realize what kind of a data it's getting stored. And once it's done, then comes the even harder part of implementing a solution where it which is ready to delete data, because you would not like to delete something which is getting already used. or maybe you would have to cut down on the use because the data has to be deleted. It has to happen both ways. Moving on to our next slide. So how does data retention is defined in CPRA, Jerome?
Okay. So section 1798.100 under the general duties of business of collecting personal information, businesses subject to CPRA must disclose first the length of the time the business intends to retain each category of personal information, including sensitive personal information. Or second bullet, the criteria used to determine that period. So as you said a while ago, Rohit, it's really something regarding how we categorize or in terms of the criteria, what are the specific categorization of the data that we are to provide or to ensure we properly secure and retain within our business, within our resources and our system.
So with this, guys, I would say here we see that the user has to be informed about how long the data is to be processed. But what about the systems? How would they know that the data has to be deleted? So take a very simple example. So a e-commerce company. So this question I will leave with you.
Right.
So you can think over it. You can comment on it, and we'll get. I would like to know your views on this. Suppose there is a e-commerce company which um takes consent to store the information of the customer for 2 years after the account has been deleted,
Right.
and then it uses just the address of uh, the customer, especially where the goods were delivered, to know how many people in that particular region use that particular e-commerce platform. Now, would this would this be a PII, sorry, and would this fall under in the category of data retention and data deletion? I would like to know your views. So you can put them in comments, and or you can message me on LinkedIn. I would really like to know your view on this. I'll again explain. The e-commerce company is only using the address of its existing customers to to create a graph of where these customers are present region wise, and in that particular region what is the presence of that particular organization. It's not using the customer's name, payment, or any other ID. And the addresses of a locality is normally available in public. You can go there, you can say, okay, it's house number 29, it's house number 34 in a particular street. But will this should fall under a retention schedule? I would like to know your views. Moving on to the next slide, we have another question. Does CPRA require companies to publish the data retention period that applies to personal information it collects from the customers?
We can discuss maybe on the next slide, but I don't want to, you know, ex- what do I call it?
Okay, let's not
Spoil,
give them the answer.
spoil.
Yeah.
Yeah, spoil the answer. But yeah, this is always the question of whether there's a requirement for us to publish data retention or for our company's sake, for instance, for our privacy policy or for any other documents we release online. But this is very important, in terms of notifying our data subject. So yeah,
So I think so. This is we can discuss it in the next slide, which is
the
what
requirement.
are the requirements in terms of data retention. So
So
would
yep.
you like to throw some light on this?
Okay. So here are the list some of the data retention requirements that the Tsaaro team was able to collate and uh, what do we call this, translate from the long list of provisions that CPRA has. And also one of the list here is the identification and communication of the retention period for all types of, I mean, for each type of personal data to to the data subjects. So again, as I've said earlier, it's very important that we provide identification, and this is part of the data subject notification. We communicate to our data subject the retention periods is provided there and the personal data, the type of personal data that we have to collect. As part of course, the purpose, we have to identify, provide them the purpose to communicate them, the use or processing of personal data. Second one is building and harmonizing retention schedules in accordance with all regulatory requirements. So within CPRA or within other scope of law, legal requirements that needs collect personal information, it should be within those bounds. Establishment of a data retention process in accordance with the data retention policy set by organization. So it's always within the buy-ins of our organizations. The data retention policy should always be within the management decision, but of course, should always be logically based on how we process personal information. What are the business needs? We have also to consider other regulatory requirements such as the HIPAA, if there are certain HIPAA requirements at hand. And the most important thing is transparency in terms of data retention, which is, I think, one of the principles of data privacy and data protection that we always have to uphold and to ensure. In all of our processes, there's always a transparency from from the point of collection up to the point of destruction. All should be transparent in a lot of principles, concepts, and ways of how we manage personal data. It's actually an evidence or a testament for us to provide our data subjects the how we are very serious in terms of managing, protecting, and ensuring that their personal data are all kept safe at all times.
I think so you're right in this case. And see, when we are talking about these privacy regulations, as data subjects, we feel empowered because we have the data subject access requests. Okay, if we want the data to be deleted, we can raise a request, it will be deleted, and we have the right to be forgotten. We can, or if there is we need to know what information has been collected, we can get it. But guys, this that is something that you have to do manually. That is not by default. You can
I
always
agree.
ask somebody to do it for you, but that is not by default. The data retention schedule is something that an organization does by default. So this is, if you read the retention periods of the data, now you know, okay, I do not have to raise a request. Company itself is responsible, and maybe it will delete my data in 6 months or 1 year down the line when I stop using it. I say I want to delete an account, it's not like they will be following me around all over the internet. So this is something that is by default, and uh, this is something very empowering. Now this is the number thing. This is always what to say. I always get excited hearing the numbers. Not good for the what to say. These are always fines. That is not very good for the organizations. But reading the numbers, it tells us how serious the regulatory authorities are, how serious the government is taking privacy into consideration. So, Jerome, would you like to tell us about the consequences if the for non-compliance here?
Okay, yeah. So again, every regulatory or even um, legal areas would always have certain compliance requirements. And this is one thing that is good about CPRA, that as early as now, they have already provided specific infraction values that we can be a basis. It's very important because there are certain laws from other regions and other countries who lacks this. And this is something that we can really rely on. At least there are no gray areas in terms of this area. The consequences when we are non-compliant with the CPRA, such as having these types of damages. Imagine this: you have damages ranging from $100 to $107.50 per customer per incident. That could even provide you, if you are going to count it or compute it within how many data subjects, how many infractions or violations you've had. You could have even millions or even billions or trillions of damages or violations that you have to add as a cost to your operations, which is a great impact to the operation of each of the company, regardless of where the business or the area the specific business operates. It's very important. So we really have to be very careful and really have to be we have to take serious efforts for us to ensure that we are compliant with a lot of our laws, specifically for CPRA. Not only for CPRA, remember we also have other regulations, especially other businesses or specific businesses on specific areas or uh, a specific operating rhythm that they are holding personal information for a specific purpose. So you always have to consider all of these things because it will really impact the operations and the organization. And we have to follow CPRA, especially for those located in California. For those who are not located, you can use this as a basis, but of course, it is always a good or best practice that we look into our own operations. You have to think it in advance. You have to make sure that our operations that how we operate or handle controls and process personal information are really based on these kinds of laws that are stringent and strictly being implemented.
Yep. And but the law says that the data which has been collected after 1st of January 2022 will fall under the regulation, not all data.
Yes, not all.
So,
It's not retroactively applied. Correct. That's
yeah.
correct.
So on the implementation end, it's a bit leniency for the organizations. Um, but for the customer, we can just say that, okay, we'll have to find a middle ground somewhere.
Correct.
Sorry for my confusion also. Sometimes I say Jerome and sometimes I say Jerome because I live in the Netherlands and here the J is pronounced as Ye.
Yeah,
So,
I understand that.
for yeah. So I am Rohit Jain in India, but I'm Rohit Jain in the Netherlands. So that is where the problem comes in.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's, I think so, we can discuss the measures uh, which will somehow I don't think that worked out very well. But we can discuss on the measures how an organization can strengthen itself uh, in terms of data retention.
So provided here are the measures to strengthen our data retention strategy of organizations. But of course, it would not be as concrete as this one without having the information about data retention policy, how we are going to implement data, or how do we establish and implement data retention policy. Just like any organization, we always have three parts of what we need to do in terms of implementing or executing our policies or our security measures. We have the governance, the risk and compliance. The governance is the start, wherein you find ways on how you establish a certain policy, which is in this case a data retention policy. Risk could happen even before establishment, even during establishment, even after establishment. So that is something that we always have to watch, and that is the main consideration or main factor element that we have to consider when we are creating a data retention policy. What has happened from other companies within my own business, within my own area of business or economy, what has been happening and what might happen in the future. And of course, compliance. In terms of this one, we have to to check, is it within the provisions provided by the CPRA, or if there are gray areas, can we look into other regional regulations? Can we look into the European Union's GDPR, or even the HIPAA if I am working on personal health information, or PCI DSS if I'm working with card payment industry or payment card industry, right? But in this case, we have to look into how do we strengthen data retention. You have to understand and evaluate the existing retention schedule, procedures, and tools. What are the resources? What are the available tools that we have in the industry? Uh, and of course, just like a policy, you always have to make a review, revamp your retention policy and schedule. You don't only update your data retention policy, you also have to update the schedule of your data retention. And of course, the dilemma always here is, how do I categorize personal information? That is something that you have to look into as an organization and in your industry as well. So it's very important that you have your own group of, or association or foundation, or a certain organization within your business that you have to join, so that you would be able to also share your current issues and problems and look into how they process it, how they categorize their personal data, and how do they set a specific schedule for that specific criteria of data or the data type. Right size your planning to update your retention policy and schedule. It's always important that, again, as part of minimization, purpose limitation, there should always be the right size of plan in order for us to update your retention policy and the schedule. And of course, the full implementation, which usually is a bit hard because, especially if your organization is still using a manual process, but I don't think most of the organizations are still using that. If you're going to comply with the CPRA, we have to understand that we always have to take an advantage of our technology. Look into how we are going to manage and process our personal information, including the supporting technology, which is very important. Now there are a lot of technologies being used for data protection. There are also ERP that are being used for us to manage personal information, and not even that, even compliance and risk. So we have to always took our full force and full resources for us to be able to properly look into how we implement these things. We also have to configure all of this in our systems. And lastly, update required disclosure and agreements. So it's more really of the governance side. At the end of the day, it's always the basis that we have to look into, whether we are still in that company, or at least even in the future, when we are going to leave the company, we don't leave it like we leave it because we earn from it, and then afterwards we no longer take serious actions on this. We always have to take full responsibility up until the end of making sure that there are updated required disclosure and agreements, and these agreements are based on the legal and acceptable best practices in our industry.
I agree with you. This is, first of all, the right thing you mentioned is we have to take support of technology because the technology is getting mature more and more. There are various tools which are there, which can help in archiving and deletion of data. Even the cloud platforms, which are thoroughly getting used and becoming what to say, the default for any infrastructure in the company, they facilitate data retention schedules. And even the databases that are coming in, you can do it on level, on record level. uh, you can set up retention schedules, but from an organizational standpoint, it always come to governance. We can always build these schedules and we can say that they will be implemented using this technology, but to what maturity? Are we covering the whole organization? So that is where your strength in creating a better governance program and taking it all from top to bottom creates a great impact. And all the detention schedules have to be based on they have to comply on various regulations. So as you mentioned, if you are on a finance, especially the cards industry, then um, PCI DSS is there, and if you're in the medical session, maybe HIPAA will apply to you. But governance will be the most important part when it comes to your retention schedules, implementing them, making them, because always you can create a framework. In the end, if there are multiple regulations, you will need a more comprehensive framework, but you will be able to make that framework. The challenges will apply when you have to implement that framework into the organization. So with this, guys, I think so. This is the last slide that we have, and we can, if you have any questions, you can put it in the comments, and we can discuss them. I think so. We have had a very good discussion. We covered all the topics. I would give that credit to you and I. People that do not have any questions there. Let's
Yeah.
be optimistic.
Yes. But
So
it's
it
amazing
was,
to have a discussion
yeah,
with you, right?
it was nice
And
to
we were
have you.
able to share, at least we were able to share something with our co-professionals from the industry. So yeah, there are always gray areas in all the regulations. We always just have to look into other possibilities or other references. We don't limit ourselves within the if there are still gray areas in CPRA that you think are still unclear. I think this is a new law. We can always find other references. Don't be too what do we call it? They have this term, I think, on could be too problematic or too complex on certain problems, is there are always a solutions on that. Just have that you have to take the best path. You always have to find a lot of options, the best options that you can choose from.
And the complexity of this one would highly depend on the size of the organization. So that is there. But yes, we will have to find what to say, the organization, in the organization, the compliance team and the implementation team will have to find a middle ground on this before they agree to any of it.
I That's
So
correct.
with this, guys, we will close this webinar. Feel free to connect me or Jerome on LinkedIn. And if you have questions and you are shying about, we'll not ask it in the chat. Please feel free to drop in my LinkedIn box. I will answer them. And if you want, we can get into a call and have a discussion over that also. With this, we'll end this webinar. And thank you for being there.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rohit. Thank you for our team.